our State House studio in Montgomery. I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. We have an interview-heavy show for you tonight, but first, a few headlines. Several candidates have filed challenges of the May 24th primary election to the Alabama Republican Party. State Senator Tom Whatley is challenging his one-vote loss to Jay Hovey in Senate District 27. In House District 1, challenger Maurice McCaney is challenging his loss to incumbent Representative Philip Pettis. In House District 2, Kimberly Butler is challenging the result of her not making the runoff with opponents Jason Black and Ben Harrison. Also in the Shoals, there is a challenge to a county commission election and several Republican Executive Committee contests. And after voting irregularities in Etowah County, 2 legislative races are being challenged. House District 28, where former lawmaker Mac Butler defeated incumbent Representative Gil Isbell by 219 votes, and House District 29, where Mark Gidley defeated Jamie Grant by 74 votes. Some Etowah County voters received ballots with the incorrect House district based on the latest round of redistricting. The candidates are asking the state party to order a revote. It is unclear how many votes were affected or whether it could influence the outcome. Alabama Secretary of State John Merrill said his office is working to determine that. I'll talk with Secretary Merrill later in the show. And in the other big political story of the week, there won't be a debate in the runoff between Katie Britt and Mo Brooks for U.S. Senate. Alabama Daily News and Gray Television had worked with the campaigns to set a statewide televised debate for June 14th, but those plans fell apart this week. Britt's campaign said they were uninterested in a face-off with Brooks because they are convinced he would, quote, turn it into a circus. Brooks, in turn, accused Britt of flip-flopping after she called for a debate in the months leading up to the primary. Alabama's low unemployment rate has not deterred state agencies from helping people find jobs. In fact, some are redoubling their efforts. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott reports.
Efforts to improve Alabama's workforce are as hot as the weather across the state. Many organizations are all in when it comes to helping people find work.
When you talk about workforce development in the state, you look at the current pipeline of skilled workers in the state, and we have a shortage.
Keith Phillips is the Vice Chancellor of Workforce Development and Economics for the Alabama Community College System.
We serve all Alabamians. We serve the high school students through dual enrollment. We serve the typical CTE student, career technical education student, who's seeking a 2-year associate's degree. We serve the academic transfer student who's looking to move on to a 4-year university. But we also serve some other unique populations, non-traditional students, if you will. We look at the adult population in the state.
The ACCS has some 24 colleges across the state, says Phillips, making sure they reach as many people as possible.
So what we're really doing is putting programs together that lets us meet the student where they are.
And where they want to be. For some, that's returning to work.
Now they're looking to get back into the workforce, but they need that quick, rapid training that gets them that skill or credential that gets them gainfully employed. So we're putting together programs for our colleges called Skills for Success. The idea is that these individuals can take theory online and then attend an in-person lab for the hands-on demonstration to prove mastery of theory and receive an Alabama Community College credential.
One of many programs helping Alabama's workforce grow.
Maybe you're looking for just personal development classes, or you're interested in a workforce program, or you're a K-12 student, senior who's just graduated and want to get a jump start on things. Reach out to the local community college.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Next, I'm joined by Alabama Secretary of State John Merrill. Secretary Merrill, thanks for coming on the show again.
Todd, thanks for having me as your guest.
Well, we did you had an appearance before the election. Now we've had the election, so I wanted to have you back on because there's some, drama, residual drama from the election. But before we get to some of those contested races and things like that, I wanted to ask you, how pleased were you with the election in general in terms of how it was executed, turnout, that kind of thing?
Very pleased. I mean, I was disappointed in the turnout. We had anticipated we'd have somewhere between 25 and 30% of our voters go to the polls, but we only had 23.45%. We're going to be approaching 24% when all the numbers are added back into for the final results from the provisional ballots and the UOCAVA votes. But still, it's a very, very small turnout, which does not bode well for the runoff.
Okay. Well, speaking of that, I know you've probably been anticipating a runoff, not just statewide, but in a lot of these legislative races and other races. So what goes into that? How does your office prepare for a whole new election?
Well, the main thing to remember, Todd, is that we just changed our law back in 2019 to make sure that we had a 4-week runoff instead of having a 6-week runoff. So this is the first time in a couple of decades that we had a 4-week runoff. And so the margins are reduced on time for voting registration, time for absentee voting participation, time for campaigning. All of those things need to be considered. Now, the administration of the election, you're following the standard procedures and protocols related to the administration of the election. Those things are not changing. All those deadlines will be met in all 67 counties and all 68 jurisdictions. But there is a reduced window in the other areas, and that's something that has to be given attention.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned turnout, and yes, it was down. But is it part of that reason because, like, I'm thinking 2020, that was just a monster election, right? I mean, that once in a generation kind of turnout. So does it compare more to a 2018 or 2014? Is it closer to those numbers?
Well, not really. I mean, our numbers in 2010, percentage-wise, participation was higher than it was. Also in 2014, it was higher. 2018, it was higher with a percentage. But with actual votes, they were somewhat comparable. But when you're looking at the runoff, I mean, some of those races that you were just talking about in 2012, we had 4% in the runoff. In 2016, we had 8%. 2014, we had 11%. So when you're looking at the numbers and the way things are, I mean, 10 to 15% is what I'm projecting, and that's a small margin for people coming back out, which means anything can happen. It just depends on who gets their voters out.
Well, yeah, it's a pretty small universe or small percentage of the electorate of the state that is basically choosing our next senator.
Well, and see, the last time that we chose a U.S. senator in an open seat, basically an open seat, Senator Jones was running for re-election for a full term, we had 17% of the people vote. But the thing that people don't remember about that 17% in that runoff in 20 between Senator Sessions and Senator Tuberville is that we had a 4-month delay in the vote.
Yeah.
So it was almost like we had a revote, a brand new primary again, because there'd been a lot of time for campaigning, but there was also a lot of time for people to get ready to vote again.
I know, I mean, this is maybe just more speculative, but do you have any reasons why the turnout is decreasing?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is that I think people were inundated by messaging and they got tired of it. They got tired of the negative advertisements. They got tired of the advertisements. One of the things that I thought was going to happen is that it would help increase turnout because we had several $1 million spent in the governor's race, several $1 million spent in the U.S. Senate race, regular numbers. You would think there would be a certain percentage that would be achieved, but it actually went down. And one of the things that you can attribute that to is that people are comfortable with Governor Ivey's leadership. That is very clear because she beat 8 people without a runoff. That has never happened in the history of the state. The only time we've come close to that is when there was an open seat for governor in 1966 and Lurleen B. Wallace beat 9 people without a runoff in an open seat for governor, but never has an incumbent governor defeated so many people at one time the way Governor Ivey did. She took them to the woodshed.
Well, that does make sense because I heard that from friends, colloquially, or just anecdotally, that, oh, hey, did you vote today? Like, no, man, that's all that garbage. They're just the low propensity voter was really turned off by a lot of that message. I agree with you. Moving on, there are several challenges to the election. In not statewide, but legislative? You've
Yeah,
got
5 contests in legislative races in House District 1, in the Shoals, House District 2 in the Shoals, and House District 28 and House District 29, which both have a part of or all of Etowah County, and Senate District 27 in Lee, Russell, and Tallapoosa counties.
Now these challenges, they're through the party, right?
That's correct.
They don't go to your office.
Yeah, the contest had to be done no later than noon on Thursday after the election, so just a couple of days ago. And then, of course, today is the day that any challenge had to be made about recounts being conducted. But then the contest will be heard by the State Republican Executive Committee.
So how does that work? If I want to recount, do I first have to issue that contest and then ask for a recount, or is the window done?
There is a protocol, and you have to make sure that you follow those steps and procedures based on what the code section says. But once the parties come under Title 17-13-42, they mean that they will be following the guidelines and the rules, regulations, and laws pertaining to election administration from a state's perspective, just like you would in a general election. And then when it comes to the challenges or the contest that will be heard, those start in 17-13-70 and go to 17-13-89. And when those things are asked about what procedures, guidelines, policies had to be adhered to related to election law, that's when you have to check the code out to know where you're going and what you're doing at the state and local level.
Okay, well, let's talk about Senate District 27, because this was shocked everybody. 1 vote, right? It was 4 votes on Election Day. After they counted the provisionals, Jay Hovey beats Senator Tom Whatley by 1 vote.
Out of 16,700 votes cast.
Wow. That's just really rare. Whatley is challenging. He's challenging the election. One thing I was curious about is, because you could see how a recount would be a good tactic for him. He needs 1 vote, and then 16,000 votes, maybe a Scantron got misread. So I could see that benefiting him. But it's my understanding that those recounts are done at the county level. So theoretically, could Whatley ask for just recounts in Tallapoosa and Russell where he led?
Sure, and the thing to remember is you don't have to have a recount in every box in the district. You can request a recount be done in certain boxes within the district, and you get to choose those, because as the office holder or as the competitor running for the position, you have to pay for that if you request it. So you can tailor make the contest the way you want it to be.
Okay, so let's just say that happens. Just recounts in the boxes he thinks he can pick up some votes in. But if I'm Jay Hovey, the guy that won by 1 vote, then I would want to recount in the boxes that were good for me, right? That
would be your choice, of course.
But my question is, but Hovey has not filed a contest, so is his window done?
All the windows are closed now, because all of that had to be done by noon on Friday, the 3rd of June.
Wow. Okay. How often does that happen? How often does a challenge like this succeed in a recount?
It depends on the situation. It depends on what the factors were that caused a response to happen in a certain way. It depends on the races themselves and the candidates that are involved as to whether or not they want to pursue that. And then the bigger question is, whenever you have the contest or whenever you have the challenge or whenever you have the recount, how often is it successful? Mm-hmm. Not very.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, there is no instance that I can think of in the 7 years, 4 months, and 15 days I've had the privilege to serve as a Secretary of State where we've had a recount or a contest where it has resulted in the winner being identified in another way other than after the certification occurred.
Let's talk about Etowah County. Lots of problems up there, lots of trouble with this situation where the ballots didn't have the right legislative candidates on it based on the new districts that were drawn. Can you walk us through what happened?
Well, certainly, and the thing that you have to remember is that each and every person that went to vote in Etowah County that was a registered voter and had the opportunity to cast their ballot was given the opportunity to cast a ballot. They may have not cast the ballot that was appropriate for them where they lived, but for the place where they voted and what their voter registration record indicated, they were given the correct ballot in every instance. Now, the concern that we have today is that we had a number of people who were outside of certain district boundaries in Etowah County. And that happened because the registrars did not do their work in a timely fashion. They had from November of 2021 until right before the election to get their work done. We had assisted them and pointed them in the right direction numerous times. We had done spot checks to make sure they were continuing to do their work. We had people on the ground at the Gadsden office making sure that they were doing what they needed to do in order to finalize all the work they had to do, but that work was not completed. And that was introduced to us on the 24th of May, resulted in confusion, resulted in inconsistencies and irregularities with the reapportionment maps being implemented correctly. And so we have a individual that's on the ground right now in the office there of the Board of Registrars, correcting that and helping them understand what they need to do, because all those changes by law have to be made by the registrars. It can't be made by our office, can't be made by any individual that is not a registrar that's been assigned that work by one of the three appointing authorities. Now, I will tell you, there is still an investigation that's ongoing about everything that occurred, why it occurred the way it did, and what the end result was and will be. And that will not be fully adjudicated for several more weeks. But I can tell you that it will be dealt with, and it will be dealt with swiftly as soon as the report is in. The other thing that you need to know is one of those individuals has already resigned her position, and that position has been filled by a competent professional who had been in that role before.
Well, there are election challenges in those two districts, and they are basically asking for a new election, arguing that that's allowed in the code. You've said it's not. There was this instance in St. Clair County back in the 90s where the Republican Party ordered a new election for the same type of thing. But you were mentioning that the law has changed since then.
Well, 17-13-87 does not allow for a revote to occur unless all options have been exhausted and it is not possible to identify who the winner would be in that contest, who the individual was that received the most votes, the most legal votes in the race. That's where we are today, and that's where the difference occurs as far as conclusions are concerned. Now, obviously, there's always a remedy, and the remedy can be outside the party banner going to the courts. Mm-hmm. And if they want to file a lawsuit, then obviously they'll be able to do that, and then we would see how that was adjudicated. But our position is what I just stated to you.
Okay, so bottom line, you think it's very unlikely that a new vote, a revote, would take place in those two House districts, or just in Etowah County?
I'm confident that will not occur by the 21st of June.
Okay. There's been a lot of talk, not just in those races, but even statewide, complaints from some in the Republican Party that Democrats are voting more now in the Republican Party because they didn't really have their ballot filled out, and that's impacting Republican elections. Certainly Whatley has been, there have been whispers of that in the Whatley race, especially when it comes down to one vote. But we have open primaries, right? I mean, anybody can go vote in the Republican primary.
We have open and closed primaries. Okay. And what does that mean? That means that once you identify as a member of a particular party by participating in that party primary, if you vote in the runoff, you have to stay with the same party.
Sure.
And then in the next election cycle, you can start completely over. You can change your vote, and you can vote for the other party if you choose. That's a choice that the voter has each and every election cycle.
But it would be a pretty dramatic step to go to a complete closed primary where you have to basically register as a Republican or register as a Democrat, because you would then have to deregister and swap. Just considering how much over the years people have switched parties. I mean, back in the 80s, it was the Republicans voting in the Democrat primary.
Sure, and ironically, Senator Whatley has asked for legislation to be considered several years in a row for party registration purposes, but that has not been advanced either by his party or in his chamber, let alone in the other chamber.
From your perspective, would moving to a closed primary, a truly closed primary be beneficial for the state?
I don't know. It would depend on what the people really wanted. I can't say that it would be beneficial or not beneficial. I will say this. I think there are a number of people who would be reluctant and hesitant to identify as a Republican or as a Democrat exclusively to be registered as a Republican or registered as a Democrat. Now people are all independent, and then they choose their party that they want to participate in their primary and runoff election cycle. I think people are more comfortable with that than they would be with straight party registration.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an issue to watch. Thank you for your time. I know you've had a really busy week, but we really appreciate you coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you, Todd. It's always good to be with you.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm joined by Dr. Karen Landers, Chief Medical Officer from the Alabama Department of Public Health. Dr. Landers, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Todd.
And congratulations for being named Chief Medical Officer. That happened recently, right?
Yes, it did.
What is your role as Chief Medical Officer at Public Health?
Well, I am a career public health officer. I'm a pediatrician. I've been with the Alabama Department of Public Health for almost 40 years. And of course, my role as Chief Medical Officer is really to assist Dr. Harris in his activities day to day as State Health Officer, basically helping with a number of programs in the department, including communicable diseases, home health, health provider standards, the HIV division of the health department, and the family health services. Again, really assisting with the operational activities of those programs and ensuring that we do all we can to promote and protect the health of the citizens of Alabama.
You mentioned being a career public health official. So you've seen the department evolve and probably the area evolve over many years. But it's been a significantly difficult last couple of years for the department. Has retaining doctors and nurses been a challenge in COVID, given just the intensity of the last couple of years?
Well, I think if we look across our spectrum and look at our employees in the Alabama Department of Public Health, we, like everyone else, have been affected by COVID, whether it's a family member, ourselves, as persons who have had this disease, losing loved ones, losing friends, and then just the overall activities of trying to carry out our duties day to day in this environment. So yes, it has been particularly challenging in keeping a nursing staff on board, because nurses, first of all, are our front line, and secondly, they are in high demand, and we are fortunate to have a great crew of nurses in the Alabama Department of Public Health, but many of them have left in COVID. And again, a lot of it has been just the tremendous work, just the tremendous burden of that, family issues, or again, going into another field, especially after COVID. Now, in terms of physicians, we just recently had our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Mary McIntyre, to retire, and tough act to follow. Great physician. We've been fortunate to bring on a couple of physicians, but again, our medical group is really fairly small when we consider our physician crew. We have Dr. Harris, of course, infectious diseases. My background is pediatrics and communicable diseases. We have Dr. Taylor in our BCD, Dr. Stubblefield, again, who is our new physician that's come on board to help us, Dr. Gary Pugh, who is our OBGYN consultant, and of course Jefferson and Mobile have separate entities with a number of physicians. But again, right now we're fairly thin as far as physicians, and we certainly would like to recruit some more.
Well, maybe there's some folks watching tonight that might be interested. Let's talk about COVID. We hear a lot about this BA2 subvariant. Is it posing as big of a threat health-wise and illness-wise as the other waves of COVID?
Well, I think we have to look at BA2 in terms of a variant, and then it has to have its own subvariants. Viruses mutate. I've said that so many times in COVID, and I think we have to remember that as these viruses mutate, they find ways to escape the effectiveness of the vaccine to some extent and escape therapeutics to some extent. So currently what we know about the BA2 and its subvariants, it seems to be a lot more contagious and certainly have an ability to infect people and cause disease even in people that have been vaccinated. But again, I want to point out that even if you get COVID and you've been vaccinated, your chances of having a severe case of COVID, getting in the hospital and dying is much, much less than if you have not been vaccinated. So again, we will see variants with COVID. COVID is going to be with us. It's going to infect people, but I think we have shifted over from an atmosphere that we were in to being able to manage COVID if we can keep people vaccinated and also have people take advantage of early therapeutics for COVID that we did not have 2 years ago.
I was going to ask you about that because it does kind of seem like, we might be in a long period of this of COVID just being around. Does this being infected, maybe different waves of infection, give us more immunities moving forward? Is it going to be more manageable, as you said?
Well, I think it is going to be more manageable. I think we have to remember that, again, COVID, certainly even with vaccinated persons, they may have less level of immunity than perhaps they had against the earlier waves. So we still find the vaccine to be very effective overall in keeping people out of the hospital and keeping people from dying. And so I think that's really the goal of any vaccine. And then, of course, we have therapeutics that we didn't have a couple of years ago. We have a couple of oral antiviral agents. We have the remdesivir, which is an IV drug, and it has in the last several months been able to use that outpatient, and also have a monoclonal antibody that is still effective. We've been through several iterations of monoclonal antibodies where COVID would find its way around that, but of course we still do have a monoclonal. So again, I think we're in a lot better shape in terms of therapeutics, and I would just urge people, even now, when people are so exhausted from COVID, to please remember, if you have signs and symptoms compatible with COVID, before you go out and about, get tested. Now, you can take advantage of home tests now. We actually can order those. I've ordered 2 sets of them myself to keep at home. And home tests are very useful, and there still are the tests that are out and available through medical providers, urgent care clinics, etc. So I would really urge people, if you have signs and symptoms of COVID, stay at home, either test yourself or arrange to get tested, and then keep in mind that you could be eligible for therapeutics. Again, that depends on your individual health condition and the judgment of your healthcare provider.
Let me ask you about vaccines. There are plenty of folks who might think, well, we're out of the woods, because it's not just the panic that it has been in the past, and think, well, I don't need to go get a vaccine, or I don't need to get boosted because maybe we're out of the woods, as I mentioned. What would your advice be to those folks?
Well, as a physician myself, I am reminding people constantly that vaccines have been one of the most important developments in healthcare in the last century and in this century. There have been diseases that have largely gone away in my career as a physician as a result of vaccines, or we've gotten those diseases under control. And I think that's really what we're talking about with COVID. So my medical advice is to stay up to date on your COVID vaccine. And of course that information is on our website and also CDC's. But I'm a mother. I have 2 adult daughters, and of course their husbands, and my family has been very, very proactive in getting their vaccines and staying up to date. And I remind people, I'm a pediatrician, I'm a mother, and I tell people I'm not going to give my child something, regardless of the age, that I wouldn't take myself, and I'm not going to promote this. I think both my daughters, again being in the early 30s age group, have really wanted to be a voice for women in terms of women's preventive health care, and saying, they took the vaccine and they took the boosters, and they believe it's so important for women to stay healthy, and certainly in the reproductive years. Be aware that COVID in pregnancy can be a very severe disease and can cause fetal loss or prematurity. So again, both my daughters don't have children, but they really want to add their voice as women to advocate for women's health.
Switching gears a bit, I wanted to ask you about another infectious disease that's in the news, monkeypox. What is monkeypox, and should people be concerned?
Well, certainly I want to say monkeypox is not COVID. I want to be the first to say that if you haven't already heard it. But to say that monkeypox is actually what's called an orthopox virus. And we've known about monkeypox since the late 1950s. And certainly it has primarily been in West Africa and some of the areas around that particular continent as an endemic disease. But what we've more recently seen is some cases of monkeypox in other countries in the world that have not previously reported monkeypox. Again, it's a zoonotic disease. It jumped to humans, obviously from primates. But what I tell people is an orthopox virus. It has a particularly characteristic rash that can occur, which occurs usually after a prodrome of fever, chills, enlarged lymph nodes, and again, a particularly characteristic rash. We actually have some pictures on our website of this, and we just urge people to be aware of this disease and certainly potential risk factors that have occurred with this disease in terms of potential international travel or other exposures. Again, we have information on our website, but be aware that the Alabama Department of Public Health, we have stood up our scientific response team on this. Several of us are conversant and aware and familiar with orthopox viruses. We are in regular communication about medical countermeasures that might need to be implemented. Our state lab can do testing for persons that are indicated to be tested. So again, people need to be aware of it. We have education sheets on our website about monkeypox, but at the same time, we don't want people to be alarmed about monkeypox other than being aware of it, being aware of risk factors, and being aware that, to speak with your physician if you feel that you have signs or symptoms related to this.
Okay. I also wanted to ask you about baby formula. We're seeing this national shortage. I mean, it's an emergency. We got military planes flying baby formula around. How is Alabama faring as compared to the rest of the country? Do we have a shortage here in the state?
Well, I believe every state has been influenced by this and has been affected by this. Now, keep in mind the Alabama Department of Public Health serves about 27,500 recipients through our WIC program. Our contract is with Meade Johnson, and that was not the company that had the recall. And at least at the moment, our WIC redemption, which we actually assess in real time, seems to be very stable. And we've made some modifications in our WIC formula program for our WIC recipients to ensure that they could be able to continue to get Meade Johnson products. And we know the general public that is not involved in WIC has been affected, but what we can say in Alabama is, again, first of all, we are Meade Johnson state, so we were a little less affected, at least at the moment, because of our contract, but other products are available. Other products can be substituted, and I tell people that are not WIC recipients, if you have a problem finding the formula brand that you normally give your child, please check with your pediatrician or your family physician about switching to an alternative formula. There are a number of formulas on the market that are very, very, very similar and really could be used interchangeably, but we certainly want to remind people, don't try to make your own formula. Don't look on the internet for recipes. Don't dilute your formula to make it last longer because all of these can be dangerous to children. But rather check with your healthcare provider and also be aware of our WIC income guidelines. There are people that might be eligible for WIC that previously were not eligible because we've just revised our income guidelines.
There are probably a lot of folks like me who don't have children, and so they've never really been through the baby formula thing and don't understand a lot about it. Can you, as a pediatrician, explain a little bit about why baby formula is so important in today's pediatrics?
Well, of course, this absolutely is an issue that, again, every parent in Alabama is concerned about, and we want to be able to ensure that children get appropriate nutrients and appropriate nutrition. And so I think that's what we're talking about in terms of baby formula. Certainly, as fewer women have been breastfeeding in the last century, certainly, and starting into this century, we promote breastfeeding, but we recognize that that doesn't work out for every woman. So what we want infants to have is a product or a formula that is based as closely to breast milk as possible, and that formula has actually to be manufactured according to certain guidelines so that the appropriate proteins and the appropriate sugars and the appropriate electrolytes are in that formula, so that what the infant consumes is not going to be really a counterbalance, if you will, to the metabolism, and that it will be nourishing to the infants. So we absolutely know that it's important that you use a product that, again, is appropriately manufactured. I just want to throw in something. Actually, in the late 70s, I was still in residency at the University of Tennessee and worked with Dr. Shane Roy, who is actually the physician who first discovered hypochloremic alkalosis, which is a type of chemical imbalance in children that were taking a certain type of soy formula.
Really?
So, just keeping in mind that basically the Infant Formula Act that was put into place after that, that started out with Dr. Shane Roy. And so, it's just one of the things that I've always been very aware of. One of my other mentors, Dr. Peter Whittington, who went on to be at the University of Chicago in the GI department, made us be aware as residents of all the components in the formulas, what this formula indication was, what that formula indication was, certainly kids that needed special formulas. So, I think that a lot of changes have been made just in the last 40 or so years about infant formula, but to ensure that this product is appropriate nutritionally and safe for infants to consume.
Well, I'm really glad that we had you on to be able to explain some of that for my sake and for the audience. Dr. Landers, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
Next, I'm joined by David Mowery, chairman of the Mowery Consulting Group. Dave, thanks for coming on the show again.
Hey, man, it was fun.
Well, we did the preview of the election a couple weeks ago. Now we've had the election, so I'm glad to have you on for just a little bit of post-election analysis, because it was really interesting. Lots of interesting results here in the state. Let's start at the top of the ticket with the governor's race. Kay Ivey winning without a runoff, 55, maybe more than 55% of the vote. What were your takeaways from her victory?
I think that now maybe people might finally realize that they should take Kay Ivey real seriously. I mean, is she the George Wallace of the 21st century? And I don't mean that about the way that she talks or governs, but she might be our longest serving elected official. I think they said if she serves her full term, she will be the longest person consecutively to hold the governor's office. Mm-hmm. And so my impression, and I know that's not necessarily germane to the campaign, but it's pretty cool and kind of strong that she basically slapped them. And the interesting thing is, for all the agita and the amount of money that was spent,
lots of money.
Well, I mean, did they move any in the polls? Did they move her down at all?
I mean, if you take at the very beginning, I think we did polling in March of last year, and she was polling right at 62%. So so millions and millions worth of attack ads, probably $12 or $14 million worth of attack ads to move her down 5 points. That seems like a failed campaign.
And you got to know that she's probably not going to get 60, because truly most politicians, even sitting governors with credible opponents or credible opponents with money, are 60% is getting the brake speed off of you, right? 55% is like a 12th round knockout, and not a TKO. I mean, she knocked them out. I don't think any of the top contenders, except maybe Burdette, has an electoral future.
Yeah, I agree with you about Burdette, and nobody really expected him.
Right.
It was too late, no money, that kind of thing. But he ran a positive campaign.
And a pretty good one.
All about ideas, yeah. Well, let me ask you about that, because Tim James and Lindy Blanchard did not run any kind of positive campaign. Their attacks were early, often, and quite negative. And so my question about that is, I mean, it didn't work.
Right.
And so, especially on the level of nastiness that some of them were, is this a repudiation of that level of tack? There's always going to be attack ads.
Yeah.
But of that level of vitriol?
Maybe. And the reason that I say that is I think it's something a little bit different, and that is that, like, people make two big mistakes when they get into a campaign, and one of them is that they conflate their opinion for public opinion. I think it's everybody must think it. I'm a logical person, right? I never do that because, frankly, if the public thought like me, I'd be worried. But the other thing that they do is when they test negatives, when you say, if I said this about Todd Stacey, would it make you more or less likely to vote for him? Mm-hmm. I think sometimes they're evaluating that on the information and not telling the pollster if they believe it or not.
Yeah.
So in the abstract, saying Governor Ivey had a mask mandate or Governor Ivey's a liberal or whatever, if that were true, then that would affect my vote, right?
Yeah.
But I think that there's a certain percentage, I don't know how much it is, but they think, well, yeah, that would affect my vote, but I don't believe it. And that's the thing. They couldn't make anything stick. There's nothing that they could do to make anything stick.
Yeah, I mean, comparing her to Joe Biden, and
come on,
that's a little hard case. Well, let's move on to the Senate race, the big one. It's going to a runoff, but Katie Britt at 45% compared to Mo Brooks' 29%. Were you surprised that she got that high of a margin?
I was almost like, and this is not to say that I feel like they did anything wrong or whatever. I almost felt like when she was hovering in the mid 40s that she might get 50, and that did surprise me.
On election night.
Yes, sorry, without a runoff. And it did surprise me just because I felt like a month ago this was a different campaign, and I guess I was probably concentrating on other things or whatever and kind of missed the shift. But I felt like they would lead, but maybe be like reaching for 40, 37. That'd have been 37 would have been like, let's go, victory, right? 46. I mean, Mo ought to consider just conceding.
Well, he's not going to do that. It's going to be
I know
a big runoff. But I agree, because when election night, I was going into election night, my number was 40. If she got close to 40 or got 40, that would be a really big thing for Katie Britt going into the runoff. But yeah, 45, 46, that seems like a big advantage. But you've got the other factor here, Mike Durant. He got about 23% of the vote. On election day, I think he knew the writing was on the wall and was talking about endorsing Mo Brooks. Mm-hmm. Now we've learned that he won't endorse Mo Brooks. He's on the radio saying not only will he not endorse, he's not even going to vote because he was so turned off by both of his opponents.
Either that or he's not registered here.
Well, I'll put it to you this way: not having that Durant endorsement, is that a really tough break for Mo?
It's interesting because I think that vote, the former Durant vote, the I dated Durant and I married Britt vote maybe, is kind of reflected on election day, in that I think that there were people that went in there and we all thought that they might vote. If they didn't vote for Durant, they would vote for Brooks. And I think a lot of those people just said, you know what, I'm going to vote for Katie. I really do. Because of there's just not that much difference between Durant and Brooks. You know what I mean? It's like a personality difference, and maybe you care about the Army thing or the Trump thing. But like, I see them as sort of competing for the same votes. And I think that, I think that Katie is competing for everybody.
Well, what happens to those voters? Do Durant voters, do they come and support Mo? Do they come and support Katie? Do they show up at all?
Is his statement a Shelby-esque in 2017? Shelby said, I'm not going to vote for Roy Moore. I'd write in another opponent or whatever. Is him saying, I'm not going to vote, a signal to people that might have supported him that they might not vote? And then that shrinks your audience, that shrinks your audience. And, runoffs are tricky. And I did say earlier that she almost got to 50, and I was kind of, that about Brooks, I was being a little bit facetious because I think that this might be a little closer than we think it will be. But, I think you have to give her the distinct advantage.
Well, this week she made the decision, her campaign made the decision not to debate, which is something I was highly involved in.
Right.
We basically had set up a debate, and kind of things began getting shaky, but ultimately made the decision, okay, we're not going to debate Mo Brooks. And what they said was, look, we don't want a clown show. He's going to turn into a circus. All that notwithstanding the reasons why, clearly it was a strategic choice not to debate. Do you think it was a wise one?
Yeah, probably, because I just don't see that they get any gain out of it. And it's sometimes when you put a direct contrast on the screen, especially in this case, an older man and a younger woman, sometimes the man comes off looking, looking like he's beating up on this little old gal or whatever. But in this case, she has such a big lead, and she's kind of shown what her campaign is going to do anyway, that I just feel like there's not much gain, and the potential gain is not as bad as the potential downside, because the flip side of what I'm saying is she could come off as shrill, she could come off as younger and, kind of out of her element. I don't think that she would, but if you just examine the dangers, the cost-benefit analysis, it's better to not, unfortunately, because like you, I believe in,
Yeah, well, and so you take the initial public relations hit of people saying, "Wow, you should. Why aren't you debating?" That's a 2 or 3 day story, but that's the risk of that is a lot less than the risk of a.
And we have a very recent example of a debate really kind of hurting a candidate and maybe turning the tide in 2020 of Congressman Moore and Jeff Coleman, who.
Yeah.
Who, by all accounts, did not do really did himself some damage in that debate. I had more people ask me if I saw that debate and tell me that it changed their vote than I've ever had anyone tell me about any debate, even a presidential one.
Yeah, so, I get it. Well, everybody's going to be watching that. Down the ballot, Secretary of State also going to a runoff. Jim Ziegler, the current state auditor, who's term limited, versus Wes Allen, current state representative from Troy. It was Ziegler had an advantage on election night, but this is a whole new election. So what
was the spread? I don't remember.
I think it was about 10 points.
Oh, really? Okay,
less than 10.
Okay, I think the last time I saw it was like they were 43-40 or something like that.
I think it could have been. It could have been that
yeah,
close.
I mean, I just that's one of those that, like, who knows, because runoff is a tricky animal. It is normally heavier partisan. It's your people that vote in every election kind of thing. But I don't know who to give the advantage to in that case, because Allen has done a great job he's been campaigning for a long time, and he's gone and talked to all the Republican clubs, and what do they say? If you got a meeting of more than 2 people, he'll show up to talk to them, and he has the advantage in advertising dollar or potential advertising dollars. But Ziegler, man, just like keeps plugging.
Yeah, he's never really depended on money,
right,
to win. And I think the last campaign finance reports had Wes Allen with $100,000, a little more than $100,000. Ziegler with $10,000. So just think about that. I mean, that's a 10-to-1 advantage.
That's like enough to maybe pay his gas.
Yeah, so,
up and down the state. But
so it's kind of a name ID, built-in name ID on Ziegler versus money. For Wes Allen.
And I truly I don't have a feel for it, mainly because we were talking offline about sort of the effect of maybe newer voters, not necessarily younger voters, but newer voters to the Republican primary, especially females, having an effect on the governor's race and the Senate race. I wonder if that dynamic will be in play in the runoff, and I wonder, and again, I don't know who it benefits, Ziegler or Allen, or the people that are voting for that are going out to vote for Britt or Brooks. Do they just, is it an undervote situation where they just vote for that and then they don't care? I don't know.
Could be. There were a lot of fascinating legislative races.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going through on election night, and the day after the election, I count 6 incumbents in the House, in the state House. 6 incumbents lost.
6 Republican incumbents?
Yeah, 6 Republican incumbents. There were a couple other Democrats, but I'm talking about the House GOP caucus.
Yeah.
That's controlling it.
The majority caucus, yeah.
Right. 6 incumbents lost. 2 more are going to a runoff. So you could have as many as 8 incumbent Republicans lose. That seems like a high number.
It does, especially considering Ivy romps, especially considering Katie Britt leads, and she, more so than Brooks certainly, has a positive, agenda for governance. Same with the governor. And so like, it's interesting to me that they couldn't draft off that, and that they couldn't claim some successes for the past 4 years, or maybe they could, and I don't know what races. And so like at the state house level, personal dynamics can come into that. You mentioned one of the guys that lost was Dismukes.
Well, right, yeah, you got to factor in one of those losses is Dismukes, who said he wasn't going to run and then did run, but I don't know. I don't think he raised any money.
Right.
And he obviously had a lot of baggage.
Yes.
Currently under indictment. So yeah, you factor that in. You think about Joe Faust down in Fairhope, who just was getting up there in age. I think he had been encouraged not to run, so
yeah,
that kind of maybe pumps the number up a little more than it should be in terms of shock value.
But those still, I mean, no matter what the circumstances were, it's like it's like Auburn, Alabama, right? If Tank had just run out of bounds, right? It's a different game.
Let's not talk about it.
But what I'm saying is they still lost,
right,
and my team has done that many times, and we cling to that Pyrrhic moral victory, right? That well, if this had happened, or if the Tyler Simmons was onside, and so even though you did have that dynamic, you kind of probably maybe needed to adjust for that dynamic and think like, hey, maybe these guys can lose, and we have to shore up these guys. I don't know.
Crazy close race in the Senate District 27. That's Auburn, Opelika, Lee County, Tallapoosa, Russell, where Tom Watley lost to Jay Hovey, an Auburn City Councilman, by 1 vote. I mean, that's just – and then this is after counting all the provisionals. It was 4 votes on Election Day. They counted all the provisionals, 1 vote. Watley's going to challenge this election. We don't know the specifics of what this is. There's talk of him basically challenging that Democratic voters somehow caused his loss. Do you see – is there any way to successfully challenge an election, or should he just do a recount?
I don't. There's legalistically, there's probably some reason, and I believe Senator Watley is a lawyer, and I think a kind of a crafty one, and so he may have a reason. I don't know. Can you not do both?
I think he plans on doing.
Yeah.
Both,
okay.
yeah.
I mean, that's that porque no los dos, right? Like, why not both?
Yeah.
I don't know. We have again. It's funny because we have a history of recounts affecting races in Alabama. If you go back to the 90s, I think. Perry Hooper Sr., there was like a year where that was adjudicated in court. It was like a Norm Coleman and the comedian from Minnesota situation, right? And I think that they were like on the provisionals. I think that it was like Florida where they're like, is this darkened enough or whatever, and so it's a very interesting one. But the problem I see is that you get. Like optically, you're going to challenge the election in your home county,
right?
And those are the folks that normally had like kind of brought Tom to the dance, and I think kind of vastly turned against him.
Yeah.
1 vote though, if you ever think your vote doesn't count.
That's right. That's right. And the other surprising race to a lot of people in this building was your candidate. Just a disclosure, you worked for Josh Carnley, who defeated Mike Jones, who, as the rules chairman in the House, most folks thought just conventional wisdom that he was going to run away with it. He didn't. Your candidate, Josh Carnley, won. What happened in that race? It did surprise a lot of people.
We took distinct advantage of almost every mistake, and frankly, I just noticed some things on how they were spending money and how much TV they were buying and all that, and kind of was like, if we just kind of go all in right here, we can do it. And we got a poll back about 2 weeks, 10 days before the election, and I think it was like the day after I came here, and it just showed that we had a chance, and I felt like we had a much better chance of doing it while both candidates were running positive ads, and it didn't turn into this dogfight, like let's just kind of go over the top and win it, and so we went all in and did it.
Well,
and one more point. And winning Coffee County 67-33, and then holding down the margin in Covington County to like 54, I think. That's the story.
Well, yeah, that's the ball game. Well, a lot of these races are going to a runoff. That's a different dynamic than just your regular primary election. Just in with a minute left, what's your basic advice to campaigns going into a runoff? How can they be successful in a runoff?
concentrate on the voters that you know voted and voted for you, and make them get out. I mean, and that sounds simple, but it's hard work because you have to have them ID'd before, and you have to. But really, it's like you're probably not going to expand the electorate, and the other thing is, like, if you're Brit, just go for the kill. Don't try to run out the clock. And if you're same thing with Ziegler or Allen, if you're Wes Allen, you need to like be going up hard and heavy in the right places. And yeah, I mean, you win races in weeks 4 and 3. Week 2, week 1, people kind of tune you out.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because it goes to GOTV, so campaigns that are organized, I think, will probably have the advantage. Britt clearly organized.
Yes.
Their ground game in the rural counties was really impressive, whereas Brooks is more of a message guy.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays off.
It really is.
Well, we're out of time, but I really appreciate you coming on, and maybe we'll do it again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next Friday night with another episode of Capitol Journal, but at a different time, 8:30 next Friday night here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.